Apple has a feature set called EDR. That's extended dynamic range. It's taking two exposures and compositing them together to create a higher dynamic range than what is possible with just the sensor itself. Now, Apple has been doing this for years now, but they used it with their Rec 709 images, right? Their gamma corrected images. It felt like, at least in the marketing, when they talked about how, okay, we're going to turn off all the sharpening, we're going to turn this off, we're going to turn that off, I think we all assumed that meant that EDR would also be turned off in Apolog. This is not the case in some scenarios. EDR is still in effect when shooting automatically with Apolog. Nobody knew this. This is not published anywhere at all. The last video I talked about this, I kind of ended it as a PSA. Like, make sure that you go fully manual workflow or make sure you go full automatic because your dynamic range is going to be different. And that's as far as I was able to take it. I'm back because I have a literal, I'm not being sarcastic, a literal cheat code to activate the extended dynamic range, to activate EDR, and set your shutter speed and ISO somewhat manually and have it locked and consistent. So to activate this cheat code, we need to like and subscribe. And then we need to go to Blackmagic Camera app, then set your exposure to auto. You're then going to need to go down to exposure compensation. That's that plus and minus icon. Click on that, roll your exposure compensation all the way up. Don't worry about if it's overexposed, where your ISO is going, just let it go. What we're making sure is happening is that EDR is engaged. And the best way to know if EDR is engaged is to see the traffic light going off. Traffic lights are those red, green, and blue dots right next to your histogram. If those are firing, you're good to go. Click off of auto. Now you have the ability to use the exposure compensation with EDR activated, but some level of manual control. So we can scroll that wheel down. And if you do it just so, there you go. 180-degree shutter at an ISO of 220. I've ran this cheat code all week, making sure that this is a consistent result. And as long as there's enough light, this clicks in every single time. 180, 220 ISO. Now, one thing to make sure when you're doing this activation is to make sure that your shutter speed is above 180 degrees, but below 300. Because if you have a shutter angle above 300, EDR will click off automatically. So you're not gonna be able to maintain that dynamic range anymore. So what you need to do is get it as high as possible without your shutter angle hitting 300. If you don't care about 180-degree shutter, you can continue to lower it to where you need to, and your ISO is going to continue to dip as well. So that's what I meant by I'm not being funny. This is a cheat code by definition. You have to engage and then trick. And just like a cheat code, if you go into the settings menu, you're going to lose it. If you change your lenses, you're going to lose it. If you tap your screen and hit auto exposure, you're going to lose it. But that we can get around and we can soft log by going into your focus tab. Now, when you tap the screen, all you're doing is adjusting the focus. It will not affect your exposure. And there could absolutely be ways of deactivating this that I don't know. So my suggestion would be is set everything and then activate this. And that's why I still recommend that you film in manual when it matters. Like, this is truly not a professional way of doing things, but it is a consistent way of doing things. You will get an additional 2 stops no matter what. You can run your highlights all the way up to 95% IRE, and your ISO is probably going to be hanging out at 220. But I have to be loud about this because this is a cheat code. Unless there is a talented developer out there that can bake in this glitch, be careful using it. That said, with all of my testing, it hasn't crashed the app. I've been able to shoot off speed. This glitch works for every single lens, but you have to set it manually per every single lens. And if you swap or zoom, it can click off. Now, thanks to this glitch or cheat code, I was able to absolutely confirm how Apple is doing this. Because let's look at this beautiful image of me from the other day when I was testing this out. You can see that the white garage behind me is held. There's still exposure in those highlights. I'm going to go lock my exposure so it's going to deactivate this glitch. And you're going to see exactly what's going on here. Did you see it? Okay, let's go frame by frame and break down. So working backwards might actually be an easier way to understand this. Here's what your manual Apolog can net you in terms of dynamic range. This next frame is the highlight exposure. And then the final frame, what we were looking at originally, is the combined image. So it's clearly stacking bracketed exposures to create a dynamic range that is greater than what manual, true Apple Log can get you. God, there has to be a better way of describing this other than EDR. True Apple Log versus Apple Log Plus, is that like, what's a good branded way of describing this so I don't have to say Apple Log plus EDR every time? Comment below. And so let's go all the way back to when Gerald Undone did his test for Apple Log. And what manual Apple Log is able to provide was 12 stops of dynamic range. That's what he has on his test at ISO 200. If we go off of that, the iPhone in Apple Log Plus is 14, if not more, of dynamic range. And honestly, it kind of gets a little tricky because I don't know how much you could really extend the highest highlight and the lowest black. I don't know where that threshold really lives because this is computational. Apple is assuming you are using automatic when you're exposing with Apple Log. Because if you shoot with Apple Log at lower ISOs, you have 3 to 3.5 stops of dynamic range above middle gray. But with this, you absolutely have 5 stops above mid gray. And now you can use that and have it locked and consistent. Like, look at this image. This is not a massive dynamic range, but what I want to highlight is with this activated, when you bring it in and you convert it using just a DaVinci Resolve CST, look how correct this looks. So put a little grain of salt onto this, but I'm using the HDR wheels to drop it down to the same exposure level that I would have to expose in camera. This is what it would most likely look coming out of camera, shot to retain the highlights. Could you recover a lot of this image? Yes, you could shift it back up 100%. But this way feels so much more correct. And then let's look at this image because this one really highlighted just how important those additional stops are. I was able to expose everything except basically the sun. This is a very high contrast image. This is about as high contrast as you can get. This is what it would look like using manual Apple Log. This is what it looks like out of camera with Apple Log and EDR. And something that I want to highlight is we talk about clip points a lot, but there is what's called the toe of your image. And although it's more nuanced than a clip point, as you can see, since I have lowered that exposure, there's now clumping and loss of detail in those shadows. That's what I'm saying. Like, this is how the iPhone is meant to be shot. So if you're shooting in the native Apple camera app, this is how it's shooting. This is how it's exposing. But you have no control over your ISO. You have no control over your shutter speed. That's why you have to move into the Blackmagic camera app. If we run this cheat code, you have control again. Because of the consistent nature of this 180 degree with 220 ISO, there should be a way that we could get a somewhat reasonably accurate dynamic range test out of it. Because it's not a moving ISO and it's not a moving shutter speed. It is locked at 180 and 220. With that, is there a way of using a Xyla chart to be able to actually try to measure how much dynamic range there is? So yeah, let's get this in the lab. I think it's time to retest the iPhone, not just because we didn't know about EDR when the initial tests were done 2 years ago, but also because Blackmagic Camera App has changed immensely since both CineD and Gerald Undone did their initial tests. So let's do it, boys. All right, bye.